He looked at the judge and whispered, "Mom, what happened next?" Silence the whole courtroom. The photograph shook in his small hands as he stood silently in court. His shoes barely touched the floor from the edge of the seat. He was just 8. No one expected him to speak. Not today. Not after everything he had been through. His name was Elijah, and in his 8 short years he had been moved through 7 foster homes. He had learned to stay quiet, learned that talking didn't help, learned that hope made things worse. But today, something was different. The courtroom was still, the kind of silence that made the walls feel heavy. Judge Rebecca Williams sat high above behind the bench, flipping through documents with her usual calm. She was known for her control, never raised her voice, never let emotions show. But something about this case made her chest feel tight. From the moment she saw the boy sitting there, holding something close to his chest, she couldn't look away. The photo he gripped looked old, worn at the edges. He never let go of it. His foster parents sat near him, stiff and polished in their designer clothes. They spoke first. "He refuses to talk to us," the woman said with a sigh. "He doesn't bond. He just stares. And when we try to help, he shuts down." "He screams in his sleep," the man added. "Clings to that picture like it's magic." The judge listened quietly. She had heard so many cases like this. But the more they spoke about Elijah like he was a problem to be solved, the more something in her twisted, something unspoken, familiar. She glanced at him again. That's when it happened. Elijah slowly looked up. His eyes, wide and dark, met hers for the first time. She froze. She didn't blink. He didn't blink. And then, softly but clearly, he spoke. "You're my mom." The room stopped breathing. The lawyers turned. The social worker's pen fell from her hand. Even the bailiff stared. The boy didn't flinch. He just kept looking at her. "You're my mom," he said again. Louder this time. Rebecca's heart slammed against her ribs. Something in her cracked. She had heard thousands of voices in that courtroom over the years. But this one, this boy, his voice reached inside her and touched something buried so deep she didn't even know it was still there. She tried to stay calm, her hands gripping the edge of her bench. There had been a time, 8 years ago. A baby, boy, complications, a hospital. They had said he didn't survive. She had never seen him, just signed the papers. Numb, broken. Could it be? Elijah was still standing, the photo now dropped at his feet. His hands trembled. He looked like he might run or cry, or both. Rebecca stood slowly, her voice barely steady. "This court will recess for 1 hour," she said. No one moved. I said, "Court is in recess." She stepped down from the bench, her robe brushing the wooden floor as she passed. As she walked past the boy, she saw the photo he had dropped. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her, 8 years ago, sitting in a hospital garden, pregnant, a hand resting on her belly. A soft smile on her face. That picture had been taken just days before her world fell apart. Rebecca walked straight to her chambers, her legs barely holding her. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding like a drum. Couldn't be. But it also couldn't not be. She hadn't seen that photo in years, and yet here it was, in the hands of a boy who just said she was his mother. She walked to her desk and opened the drawer. Inside was a small box she hadn't touched in so long. A baby's knit cap, a hospital bracelet, a copy of a death certificate. But she had never seen his face, never held him, never said goodbye. She sat in her chair, the courtroom noise fading, behind the thick walls, and looked again at the photo. He looked at her, with her own eyes. And for the first time in her career, Judge Rebecca Williams didn't know what to do next. But one thing was now burning inside her, brighter than anything she had felt in years. Hope. The kind that could crack open even the most frozen heart. And in that small courtroom, a story that had been buried for 8 years had just begun to rise. Because a little boy had spoken 4 words that shattered everything. "You're my mom." Rebecca didn't move for a long time. The office was quiet. Too quiet. Her hand still held the photograph the boy had dropped. No, Elijah. She should have been reviewing court documents, scheduling emergency placements, following routine steps. But routine had shattered the moment that little voice called her mom. She looked down at the photo again. It was real. Not something from a dream. That was her in the picture. Her face. Her belly round with life. That day had been filled with such hope. She had decorated a nursery, chosen names, bought books and tiny shoes. She remembered everything except the baby's face, because she never got to see it. They told her he had died. The nurses had said, "It's better you don't see the body." She was half awake from the surgery. Her heart was crushed before it could ever hold her child. And yet, that same child had just stood in her courtroom and called her mom. Rebecca opened the bottom drawer of her desk. It stuck slightly, like it didn't want to give up the past so easily. Inside was a box she had kept locked for 8 years. A faded hospital bracelet with the name Baby Boy Williams, a tiny hat, and a folded paper she never wanted to read again. The death certificate. She stared at it now. Why had it always felt wrong? She had tried to bury that feeling, focus on her work, serve the law. Maybe that's why she became a family court judge. Maybe she was trying to save other children, because she couldn't save her own. But what if she could? A knock at the door pulled her back. It was the social worker who had been with Elijah. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure she should be interrupting. "I'm sorry, Judge Williams," she said softly. "But Elijah's still asking for you." Rebecca stood slowly. "Take him to the children's room. I'll be there soon, and please stay with him." The woman nodded and left. Rebecca's eyes dropped once more to the photo in her hand. The boy had kept it for years, through 7 homes, through every scream and tear and night spent locked in a room. That picture was all he had, of her. She picked up the phone and made 2 calls, first to a trusted pediatric doctor she knew at a nearby hospital. "I need a confidential DNA test. Rushed. No questions asked." Then to an investigator she had once worked with on a child welfare case. "I need you to dig into a hospital's records from 8 years ago. Focus on births and so-called deaths." She hung up and walked out of her chambers, not as a judge, but as a mother who needed answers. Back in the private children's waiting room, Elijah sat in a corner, knees to his chest, his eyes fixed on the carpet. When Rebecca entered, he looked up. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't hide. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to mess up your courtroom." Rebecca knelt beside him, ignoring the ache in her knees. "You didn't mess up anything," she said gently. "You just told the truth. That matters." Elijah reached into his small backpack and pulled out another photo. It was grainy, older, but there she was again, leaving the hospital, her face pale with sadness. "Miss Jenny gave it to me," Elijah whispered. "She told me. You didn't leave me. She said, they took me from you." Rebecca's breath. "Caught? Miss Jenny?" she asked. He nodded. "She was one of the only nice ones. She read me bedtime stories. She told me to never forget your face." Rebecca blinked fast, trying to keep tears from falling. "Do you know her full name?" He shook his head. "She left one night. The next day, I was moved again." Rebecca looked at the social worker. "We need to find her. That nurse. She may be the key." The social worker nodded, already pulling out her phone. That night, Elijah came home with Rebecca. Temporarily. Just for the night, she told the system. But in her heart, something had already shifted. She gave him the guest room, warm pajamas, a toothbrush with a green dinosaur on it. He didn't say much, but he kept looking at her, like he was waiting to wake up. Rebecca tucked him in, then sat on the edge of the bed. "Would you like a lullaby?" she asked without thinking. To her surprise, Elijah smiled faintly. "The same one. You used to sing it when I was inside your belly." Her heart skipped. She began to hum. The same melody. The one she used to sing late at night when she thought the baby inside her could hear. Elijah's eyes fluttered shut, his breathing slowed, and peace settled over his small face. Downstairs, Rebecca sat in her study, holding the two photos side by side. One from her past, one from the boy's bag. The truth was right in front of her, and tomorrow she would prove it, because this time, she wasn't just a judge. She was a mother on a mission to bring her son home. The morning sun crept through the curtains in quiet streaks, casting soft gold over Elijah's sleeping face. He was curled up in bed, holding that same photograph like it was his most precious treasure. Rebecca stood in the doorway, watching him with a stillness that felt almost sacred. Her heart ached and swelled at the same time. It had only been one night. But something about having him under her roof, safe and breathing evenly in his sleep, filled a space in her chest that had been hollow for 8 long years. Downstairs, her coffee sat forgotten as she checked her phone for updates. Nothing yet from the lab. The DNA test would take at least a day, but she didn't need the results. Deep down, she already knew. She remembered humming that lullaby. Not just once, but every night when she was pregnant. She remembered the feel of his kicks, the hope in her heart when she had chosen his name, Benjamin. But then, nothing. Just a nurse telling her he didn't survive, and a doctor who never let her hold him. All of it rushed through her mind like a bad dream she could never wake from. Her hands were shaking as she opened her laptop. She hadn't checked the hospital's name in years. Riverside Memorial, the place where she was supposed to have started her life as a mother. The first thing she found sent a chill down her spine. Closed. 5 years ago. Official reason: financial irregularities. She clicked deeper. The adoption agency that handled Elijah's first placement, New Beginnings Family Services, also shut down. Same year. Her stomach turned. Suddenly, a knock on the door. It was the private investigator she had hired, a quiet man with tired eyes and a briefcase full of files. He stepped inside without a word and laid them all out on her kitchen table. "Take a look," he said. The first folder was labeled Hospital Staff, 2016. Rebecca's finger paused on a familiar face. "Her," she said quickly. "That's the nurse. She was there the day I gave birth." The investigator nodded. "Name's Jennifer Kirkland. Went by Jenny. Worked labor and delivery for 14 years. Resigned suddenly in 2017. No explanation." Rebecca's chest tightened. "Where is she now?" "Oregon," he said. "Working part-time at a small clinic. I already called. She remembers you and the baby." Rebecca's voice caught. She remembers?" The investigator nodded again. She said, "Tell her I've been waiting for this day for 8 years." Rebecca covered her mouth with her hand. Elijah's voice broke the silence behind them. "Is Miss Jenny coming?" He stood at the foot of the stairs in his socks, holding the photo again. His eyes were clear this time, not scared, just hopeful. "Yes," Rebecca said, steadying her voice. "She is. Tomorrow." Elijah nodded, like that made perfect sense. "She said you'd come." They spent the rest of the day quietly. Rebecca didn't want to overwhelm him. She made pancakes. Elijah only ate half, but smiled when she added blueberries in the shape of a heart. They sat together in the living room. She let him choose the movie. He picked something with cartoons and silly animals. But halfway through, he climbed into her lap and leaned his head against her chest. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That night, as she tucked him in again, he whispered, "Do you think they'll try to take me back?" Rebecca froze. "Who?" she asked gently. He shrugged, eyes looking away. "The people. The ones who locked the door at night. The ones who said not to talk about the photo." Her jaw clenched. "No one is taking you anywhere," she said. "Not ever again." She stayed in his room until he slept, holding his hand, watching the rise and fall of his breath. Every now and then, he would stir and squeeze her fingers. And every time, she squeezed back. When she finally stepped out, the night was deep and silent. Back in her study, Rebecca opened the last folder the investigator had left. Inside was a photo, grainy from hospital security footage. A nurse in scrubs, holding a newborn. The timestamp matched Elijah's birth. The second photo showed a baby being placed into the arms of a couple outside the hospital's side entrance. Rebecca's whole body went cold. No hospital records. No death certificate for that baby in the eye photo. Just a blurry face that now she could finally see. He had her nose. She reached into her drawer and pulled out the death certificate they had made her sign 8 years ago. For the first time, she saw it for what it really was. A lie. Tomorrow, the nurse who knew the truth would be walking through her door. And when she did, the world that tried to bury Elijah's life would start to crack open. Not just for them, but for every child who had ever been stolen, and every mother who never stopped wondering what really happened the day her baby didn't make it. The truth was coming, and this time, it would not be silenced. The next morning, the sky was overcast. Gray clouds hovered low, as if the weather itself understood the weight of the day. Rebecca stood at the window, holding a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes kept drifting to the road outside. She had barely slept. Not because she was afraid, but because part of her couldn't believe this was real. Elijah had woken up quietly, brushing his teeth without being asked, folding the blanket on his bed. He was calmer than usual, but his eyes kept checking the clock. She said she'd come today, he reminded her once, standing at the window with his face pressed to the glass. Rebecca only nodded. She will. At exactly 10:03 a.m., a silver car pulled into the driveway. Rebecca froze, her heart thudding like it used to in court right before a major verdict. The doorbell rang. She opened it slowly. There she was, older now, her silver hair neatly tied back, her eyes tired but kind. She stood on the porch holding a worn leather briefcase, like it had never left her side. Her hands trembled slightly. "Miss Jenny!" Rebecca's voice cracked on the second word. The woman blinked fast, emotion already building in her eyes. "You found him!" Elijah peeked from behind Rebecca's leg. He stared up at the woman, then slowly stepped forward. "Miss Jenny?" She crouched down, dropping her bag as tears spilled onto her cheeks. "You remember me?" Elijah nodded, his voice small. "You told me to keep the picture safe. You said my mom loved me." Jenny let out a shaky breath and hugged him gently. "I knew you'd find her one day." Rebecca guided her inside. No one spoke for a long moment as they all sat in the living room. The room felt full, like a story that had waited years to be told was finally unfolding. Jenny finally opened her briefcase and placed a thick folder on the coffee table. "I've kept everything, for years. Copies, notes, documents. I knew someday someone would want the truth." Rebecca's hands hesitated over the folder. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" I tried, Jenny said, her voice raw. I told my supervisor, I sent anonymous letters, but no one listened. And when I gave Elijah that photo, they found out. They fired me the next day, blacklisted me from every hospital. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. But I couldn't forget. I watched them take you away after you gave birth. I knew something wasn't right. You were still unconscious. They told me to follow orders, that it was for the baby's safety. But I saw the papers. I saw what they were doing. Rebecca's breath caught. What were they doing? Jenny's voice lowered. Selling babies. The room went completely still. They had a network, she continued. Doctors, administrators, even people in the records office. They'd pick vulnerable women, single, grieving, women without family nearby. They'd create fake emergencies, tell the mother the baby didn't survive. Then they'd file a false death certificate and hand the baby to someone else, usually someone who had paid a lot of money. Rebecca sat back, stunned. She had suspected something terrible, but hearing it said out loud was like being struck in the chest. Jenny pulled out photos. This is from the night Elijah was taken. I stayed late and copied some security footage to a flash drive. I knew if I didn't, they'd erase everything. She handed Rebecca a printed image, grainy but clear enough, a nurse carrying a bundled infant through the staff exit of the maternity wing. The timestamp matched the night Rebecca gave birth. I took that baby to the nursery myself, Jenny whispered. He was healthy. Perfect. The next morning, they told me he died. Of complications, but I knew they lied. Elijah was listening carefully, sitting cross-legged on the couch, holding the photo in his hands again. Is that what happened to me? He asked. Someone paid to take me? Jenny nodded gently. Yes, but it was never your fault. You were always loved. Rebecca reached out and took his hand, squeezing it. Jenny looked at Rebecca. I've kept records of payments, birth dates, the names of couples who adopted without going through proper checks. I don't know how many children, but Elijah wasn't the only one. Rebecca nodded slowly. This is bigger than just one mistake. It's a system, Jenny said, her voice growing stronger. A system that hurt children and destroyed mothers. They sat in silence for a moment, the air heavy with truth. Rebecca picked up the folder and turned to the last page, a handwritten note from Jenny. It read, To the mother who was told her baby died, he didn't. And he never stopped waiting for you. Tears spilled freely down Rebecca's cheeks. Elijah leaned against her shoulder. I told you I remembered your voice, he said, quietly. When you sang. Rebecca held him close, her arms wrapping around his small frame. And I'll keep singing, every night. Jenny watched them, tears falling freely. You were meant to find each other, and now that you have, we need to help the others. Rebecca nodded, a quiet fire building behind her eyes. Yes, she said softly. We will. The next morning came with a kind of stillness that felt like something was holding its breath. Rebecca stood in front of the courthouse, her hand resting gently on Elijah's shoulder. The boy was nervous. His eyes scanned the faces walking by. He didn't like crowds, and he didn't trust strangers. Not yet. Jenny stood beside them, holding her bag full of documents. Inside that bag were the truths that had been hidden for nearly a decade. Names, payments, photos, handwritten logs. Evidence that couldn't be ignored. I'll be right with you, Rebecca said softly to Elijah, kneeling to meet his eyes. You don't have to speak today. You already did the bravest thing of all. Elijah nodded, gripping the photograph in his small hand. Inside, the courthouse was full of quiet tension. Rebecca had scheduled a closed-door emergency session with federal officials and investigators. She was no longer wearing her black robes. Today, she was not sitting behind a bench. Today, she was standing on the other side, as a mother, a witness, and a whistleblower. The room was filled with people she once called colleagues, judges, lawyers, state officials. But today, they didn't look at her the same way. They had heard the rumors. Some of them had seen the footage Jenny recovered. Others had read the quiet headlines. Judge suspends hearings after shocking courtroom moment involving missing child. Rebecca stepped forward, cleared her throat, and began. "I was told my son died during childbirth," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I signed papers. I trusted the doctors. I never held him. I never saw him. For 8 years, I believed I had lost him." She paused and let her eyes meet theirs. "But I was wrong. He was taken, and I am not the only one." Jenny stepped forward next. Her voice shook at first, but her eyes were clear. "I worked at Riverside Memorial for 14 years. I saw too much. And when I tried to speak up, they destroyed my career." Then she opened the briefcase and laid the evidence across the long table, paper trails, secret payments, altered birth logs, fake names, recordings. And slowly, the room changed. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was hot, angry, alarmed. By the end of the meeting, the head of Child Services had already made a call to the governor's office. An FBI contact was brought in. Jenny's evidence had everything they needed to start, and Elijah, just 8 years old, was at the center of it all. That same afternoon, Elijah waited in a small room nearby, sitting quietly with a court-appointed child psychologist. His hands were folded in his lap. He wasn't asked to speak, but he did. He told them about the photo, about how the Turners locked his door at night, how they told him he'd be taken away if he ever talked about his fake mom, how he remembered a nurse whispering to him, "You're not forgotten. Don't lose this picture." The psychologist wrote every word down. When Rebecca entered the room again, Elijah ran to her without hesitation. "They believe me," he whispered. "They should," she whispered back, kneeling to hug him, "because the truth is finally here." By the end of the week, it was no longer a quiet case. Federal agents raided what was left of Riverside Memorial's storage rooms. Records were missing. Birth logs were incomplete. But some things couldn't be erased: security footage, emails, and the people who remembered but were too afraid to speak until now. More nurses came forward. 2 other mothers contacted the courthouse after watching the early news coverage. One of them said, "I don't care if it's been 10 years. I knew something was wrong. My son never died. They wouldn't let me see him either." Within days, Rebecca's quiet life became something else entirely. Reporters camped outside her home. Her phone rang day and night, but she stayed calm for Elijah. Every morning, she still made him pancakes. She helped him with homework. She read bedtime stories and hummed lullabies. She held him when he woke from nightmares. And she told him, again and again, "You're safe. You're home. No one is taking you away." One night, while brushing his teeth, Elijah asked her a question that made her freeze. "Am I broken?" Rebecca crouched down beside him. "Why would you ask that?" "Because the families kept sending me away. I didn't know how to smile, or talk right, or be normal." Her throat tightened. "You are not broken, not even close." He looked at her with tearful eyes. "But what if the other kids still think they are?" She pulled him into her arms. "Then we'll tell them the truth too, just like you told me." Outside, the media had started calling it the stolen baby scandal. But for Rebecca and Elijah, it wasn't about headlines. It was about making sure no other child had to carry a picture and a secret for 8 years. It was about bringing light into the darkest place, the place where mothers were told to forget and children were told to stay quiet. That place was cracking now, and the truth, after all this time, was rising. 2 weeks later, the world no longer looked the same. It started slowly. First, one arrest. A doctor from Riverside Memorial. Then another. A woman from the hospital's administration office. Within days, 4 nurses, 2 records officers, and an adoption agency director were in handcuffs. Their faces on every news channel. Their names, suddenly surrounded by headlines with words like trafficking, forged documents, and stolen children. And at the center of it all was a boy who had once been too afraid to speak. Elijah. He didn't understand why cameras followed them now, or why reporters stood outside their home. He only knew that people were listening. Really listening. And that made something inside him feel lighter. Still, Rebecca kept their lives as normal as she could. They had breakfast together every morning, even if it meant turning off the news. She walked him to school, his new school, where teachers were trained to help children who had been through trauma. He liked it there. They didn't rush him to speak. They let him draw instead. And his drawings, Rebecca noticed, were slowly changing. There were fewer monsters in them now, more trees, more stars, more smiling faces. He was healing, but the country was waking up. The FBI had launched a full-scale task force. It was called Operation Lost Children. And Rebecca, once a quiet judge who rarely gave interviews, was now speaking to officials across the country. Hospitals were being investigated. Adoption agencies re-reviewed. Dozens of families who once believed their babies had died were now stepping forward with questions. Rebecca couldn't sleep most nights, not because she was afraid, but because the stories kept coming. One mother in Texas, another in Michigan, a couple in Florida who had been told their baby girl had respiratory failure, only to discover her name on a fake adoption certificate months later. It was happening everywhere. And it had been happening for years. One evening, as Rebecca was sorting case files in her home office, Elijah wandered in holding a blanket. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" he asked. Rebecca looked up and smiled. "Of course," he hesitated. "It's not a nightmare. I just feel strange." "What kind of strange?" He sat down beside her. Like a lot of people are watching me now, even kids at school. Some say I'm famous, but I don't want to be famous. I just wanted to find you." Rebecca pulled him close. "You didn't ask for this, but what you did, it gave a lot of other kids hope. Maybe that's why they look at you. Because you're brave." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you think the other kids will get found too?" "I do," she said. "And you helped make that happen." The next morning, Elijah did something he had never done before. He stood in front of his class and showed them the photograph, the same one he had carried through 7 foster homes, the one of his mother before she knew he was alive. "This helped me remember who I was," he told them, "and who she was." That simple act was photographed by a teacher, and days later, it spread online. The image of a boy holding a creased photo in a classroom full of children became a symbol, the face of a stolen generation finding their way home. Jenny, the nurse who had helped start it all, was now helping federal investigators full-time. She worked from a secure location but spoke regularly with Rebecca. One day her call came with a crackle of emotion in her voice. "They just found another child," she said, 12 years old, in Ohio. He remembered a song his mom used to sing. Same lullaby as Elijah. DNA confirmed it this morning. The mother cried for 5 minutes before she could even speak. Rebecca sat down slowly. "Another miracle." "No," Jenny replied. "It's justice finally catching up." And it was. Hospitals were being forced to open sealed records. Secret deals were unraveling. And behind every new match, every child found, was a copy of Elijah's story, passed from one mother to another, one social worker to another. A reminder that even after years of silence, truth could still rise. But not everyone was happy. Late, One night, Rebecca's doorbell rang. She opened it to find 2 FBI agents standing in the dark. "We need to move you," one of them said. "There's been a threat." Rebecca froze. "A threat? Some of the people involved? They don't want more truth coming out. We've intercepted messages. Your family is a target." She looked over her shoulder. Elijah was asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket, a soft cartoon playing quietly on TV. She turned back to the agents. "We'll pack tonight." By sunrise, they were gone, relocated to a lakeside cabin with tight security. The world thought they were on vacation. Only a few people knew the truth, but even there, Elijah was calm. "I don't care where we live," he said simply, "as long as we stay together." Rebecca kissed the top of his head. "We will, always." Outside, the lake was still. Inside, the fireplace crackled. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table that night and opened her laptop. She typed the title of a speech she was asked to give next month. "From Silence to Truth: What One Child Taught Us About Never Giving Up." She looked over at Elijah, now asleep with his favorite stuffed lion. He had been silenced for years, forgotten, passed around, but now the world was listening, and justice, real justice, was finally on its way. 1 year had passed, not quietly, not easily, but powerfully. And today, Rebecca stood before a crowd of over 600 people in a sunlit convention center in Washington, D.C., her voice echoing across the room. On the screens behind her were the faces of children once thought lost. Faces of mothers who had mourned empty cribs and signed death certificates they were never meant to sign. At the front row, Elijah sat beside Jenny, his hands folded neatly. In his lap, his shoulders no longer hunched like before. His back was straight, his eyes calm. He was no longer hiding, and when Rebecca spoke, he listened, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "My son said 4 words in a courtroom that changed everything," she told the audience. "You're my mom." And in that moment, the world tilted back toward truth. The crowd was silent, emotional, present. Some were parents. Some were former foster children. Some were caseworkers, nurses, judges, teachers. All of them had come for one reason: to witness how healing begins. "I was told my baby died," Rebecca continued. "I was handed a paper, never a child. And for 8 years, I lived with that ache. But Elijah, he held onto a photograph. He held onto a lullaby. He held onto a memory I didn't even know he had." She paused, took a breath. "Today, over 400 children have been reunited with their biological families because one boy refused to forget, because one nurse chose to speak up, and because one truth, once whispered, refused to be silenced." The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Rebecca didn't smile for the cameras. She turned to look at Elijah instead, and he smiled up at her. He was wearing a blue shirt and a badge around his neck that read, "Peer Support Leader." After the speech, he would lead a session for other kids just like him. Kids who had been told to stay quiet. Kids who thought they didn't matter. Elijah knew what to tell them now. You do matter. You're not broken. And you're not alone. Anymore. That evening, back in their hotel suite, Elijah curled up beside Rebecca on the couch. The city lights glowed outside the window, but inside, the space was calm. "Safe. Mom," he said softly, "do you think there are still more kids out there, still waiting?" Rebecca wrapped an arm around him. "I know there are." He was quiet for a moment. "Then I want to help them. All of them. Not just the ones here. The ones still hiding. The ones who don't even know yet." Rebecca smiled. "You already are. Just by being you." He looked up at her, suddenly serious. "It's kind of strange, right? That one picture I kept. It brought everything back." She nodded. That photo brought you home and helped other children find their way too. From her suitcase, Rebecca pulled out a framed copy of that same photo, herself years ago, smiling in the hospital garden with one hand on her belly. It now stood next to a new photo, her and Elijah, standing hand in hand on courthouse steps, the day the judge signed the final papers confirming their legal bond. Elijah reached for the picture, then asked, "Can we keep both on my desk at home?" "Of course," she said. He leaned into her side and yawned. "Miss Jenny says stories are like roots. They hold us in place even when the wind blows." "She's right," Rebecca whispered, brushing his hair back. "And you, my love, are the strongest tree I know." Over the next months, Operation Lost Children expanded into a national effort. State by state, hospitals were investigated. Adoption agencies were audited. Judges who had fast-tracked illegal placements were removed from the bench. The FBI established a dedicated child trafficking unit. And for the first time, parents across the country were offered free DNA testing if they had ever been told their baby died under unclear circumstances. The results? Staggering. Families in Boston, Houston, Seattle, Atlanta, mothers and fathers reunited with children they thought had vanished forever. Some reunions happened in courthouses. Some happened in hospital hallways. Some happened in quiet living rooms with tears and shaking hands and lullabies that still lived deep, in memory, and in every one of those stories. Elijah's name was there, not as a victim, but as a voice. The first voice that had dared to say, "You're my mom." On the one-year anniversary of their reunion, Rebecca and Elijah returned to the original courthouse. Room 307. It was empty, now, quiet again. They stood in the center of the room. Rebecca looked around slowly, then turned to Elijah. "This is where you found me." He nodded, his hand slipping into hers. "You changed everything," she said softly. He shrugged, trying to smile. "I just told the truth." "And that truth," she said, "set thousands of others free." They sat on the bench in the back row. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elijah reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded paper. It was a drawing. Rebecca took it and opened it slowly. It showed a tree, tall, strong, with roots going deep. At the center was a little boy holding a photo. Behind him stood a woman with her arms wide open. All around them, smaller trees grew taller, reaching toward the sky. At the top of the drawing, in Elijah's handwriting, were the words, "Truth grows where love is remembered." Rebecca blinked away tears, her heart full in a way she never thought it could be again. She pulled him into a hug and whispered, "I'll never forget. Not ever." Elijah hugged her tighter. "I know," he whispered back. "That's why I found you." Outside, the sun was setting over the city. Inside, in that same courtroom where it all began, a mother and son sat side by side, not as a case or a tragedy or a news headline, but as a family, together, finally, forever.